Picture this. You are standing next to an ancient human, not next to them from a comfortable distance, not observing them from behind glass in a museum diorama. Right next to them. Close enough to have a conversation if you shared a language. Close enough to notice everything about them. The animal skin they're wearing, the dried blood under their fingernails from the animal they helped process 3 days ago, the smoke from last night's fire still sitting in their hair, the accumulated sweat of a week of hard physical movement across open terrain under a hot sun. Close enough, in other words, to smell them. And here is the question. What do they smell like? Take a second and actually think about it. Your brain will probably generate an image that is somewhere between unwashed gym clothes and a barnyard, with maybe a hint of campfire smoke. Something deeply unpleasant. Something that no modern person could endure without their eyes watering. Something that confirms every assumption you have ever unconsciously held about what it meant to be human before the invention of the shower. And here is where it gets interesting. Because the science of body odor, and it is a genuine science, studied by microbiologists and evolutionary biologists and anthropologists who have spent significant careers on this specific question, suggests that the answer is far more complicated than that mental image. And in several important ways, surprisingly, it is an answer that should make you question almost everything you think you know about what ancient humans smelled like, why we smell the way we do, and what the concept of smelling bad even means when you strip away civilization and all the expectations it brought with it. Today we are going to answer the question properly. We are going to go through the biology of body odor from the ground up. Look at what the evidence actually shows about ancient human smell, find out whether ancient humans cared about how they smelled, and end up somewhere that will probably change how you think about the deodorant sitting in your bathroom. This one smells like an interesting video. Let's go. Before we can talk about what ancient humans smelled like, we need to understand what body odor actually is. Because most people have a fundamental misunderstanding of where the smell comes from, and that misunderstanding changes everything that follows. Here is the thing that surprises most people when they first encounter it. Sweat does not smell. Not meaningfully. Not in the way we associate with body odor. Sweat by itself, freshly produced, is almost entirely water with trace amounts of salts, proteins, and other compounds. If you could collect fresh sweat and smell it before anything else happened to it, the experience would be largely underwhelming. A faint saltiness at most. Certainly nothing that would clear a room. The smell that we associate with body odor, the distinctive, sharp, sometimes eye-wateringly intense odor of an unwashed human body, does not come from the sweat itself. It comes from bacteria. Your skin is home to an enormous and complex community of microorganisms. Your skin microbiome. Billions of bacteria living on your body's surface at all times. These bacteria are not passengers. They are participants. They consume the compounds in your sweat as a food source, and as they break those compounds down through their metabolic processes, they release volatile organic compounds as byproducts. Those volatile compounds are what your nose detects as body odor. The specific bacteria most responsible for the most offensive odors include species from the genera Corynebacterium and Staphylococcus. When these bacteria consume the proteins and lipids secreted by your apocrine glands, which are concentrated in the armpits, groin, and other high odor areas, they produce compounds called thioalcohols. Thioalcohols smell, depending on the specific compound, like onions, sulfur, or rancid meat. They are extraordinarily potent. A vanishingly small concentration of thioalcohol molecules in the air is enough to produce a clearly detectable and unpleasant smell. So body odor is not a simple consequence of sweating. It is a consequence of specific bacteria consuming specific compounds in specific areas of the body and producing specific volatile byproducts. And here's the critical insight that makes everything about ancient human smell more complicated. The composition of those bacterial communities and the compounds those bacteria have available to consume are both powerfully shaped by what you eat. Diet is the hidden variable in every discussion of body odor, and it is the factor that most dramatically separates what ancient humans smelled like from what modern unclean humans smell like. The bacteria that produce the most offensive body odors, the thioalcohol-producing Corynebacterium species that are responsible for the sharp, sulfurous body odor associated with unwashed modern humans, are fed and sustained by specific compounds that are dramatically more prevalent in modern diets than in the wild foods that ancient humans ate. Refined carbohydrates and simple sugars, which make up a substantial fraction of modern caloric intake through processed foods, bread, pasta, rice, and everything that contains added sugar, feed odor-producing skin bacteria in ways that dramatically increase the intensity of body odor. The high-fat, high-sugar, heavily processed modern diet creates metabolic byproducts that end up in sweat and provide an exceptionally rich food source for the bacteria most responsible for offensive odor. Ancient humans ate none of these things. Their diet was wild game, lean, high protein, no added fat or sugar. Wild plants, roots, tubers, seasonal fruits, nuts, and whatever else the landscape provided. No refined carbohydrates, no added sugars, no processed anything. A diet that was, from the bacteria's perspective, dramatically less generous than what modern human sweat provides. This is not speculation. Research on the relationship between diet and skin microbiome composition is an active and growing field, and the consistent finding is that diet significantly shapes which bacterial species dominate the skin microbiome and therefore what those bacteria produce when they interact with sweat. People eating high-fiber, whole food diets with minimal processed food consistently show different skin microbiome compositions than people eating modern Western diets. The bacteria that produce the most intense odors are less dominant. The metabolic byproducts they produce are less concentrated. An ancient human eating a traditional hunter-gatherer diet would have had a skin microbiome shaped by that diet, different in composition, and producing a different and almost certainly less intense odor signature than an unwashed modern human eating modern food. The ancient human did not smell like a modern person who hasn't showered in 2 weeks. They smelled like themselves. A distinctly human smell, certainly present, but significantly different from what our modern intuition projects onto them. This matters enormously for how we think about ancient human hygiene and smell. The popular image of ancient humans as overpoweringly malodorous is, at least in part, a projection of modern biology onto ancient people. We imagine how we would smell if we stopped bathing and applying deodorant. But our smell in that scenario is shaped by our diet, our skin microbiome, our soap-disrupted natural bacterial communities, and decades of modern food and modern hygiene products. Ancient humans were none of those things. Now, let's bring in something that adds another layer entirely to this question. Ancient humans had a genuinely excellent sense of smell, not in the way that dogs do. Humans are not olfactory specialists in the way many other mammals are. But compared to modern humans living in deodorized, artificially scented, sensory-overloaded urban environments, ancient humans were operating with a sense of smell that was sharper, more trained, more actively used, and more important to daily survival than most modern people can easily imagine. Smell was a survival tool. Ancient humans used their sense of smell to identify food sources, ripe fruit, fresh water, recently killed game. They used it to detect threats, the smell of predators, the smell of fire, the smell of contaminated water or food before consuming it. They used it to navigate familiar landscapes, carried olfactory signatures that could orient a traveler as reliably as visual landmarks. They used it to read other people. Body odor carries genuine information about health status, reproductive state, stress levels, and genetic compatibility. Information that ancient humans would have been actively processing in ways modern deodorized humans mostly cannot. Research on modern hunter-gatherer communities that have maintained traditional lifestyles shows consistently heightened olfactory discrimination compared to urban populations. The Jahai people of the Malay Peninsula rainforest have been studied specifically for their olfactory abilities and show vocabulary and discrimination for smell categories that have no equivalent in most modern languages, suggesting a relationship with the olfactory world that modern urbanized people have largely lost through disuse. What this tells us about smell in ancient humans is significant. Ancient humans were not indifferent to smell. They were deeply attentive to it. It was a primary sense in a way that modern people, surrounded by artificial scents and trained by culture to deodorize everything, are no longer positioned to fully appreciate. And crucially, they would have been attentive to their own smell and to the smell of the people around them, not in the modern framework of social embarrassment about body odor, but in the practical framework of smell as information. An ancient human whose smell suddenly changed, who started smelling of infection, of disease, of fear, was broadcasting information to the people around them. That information was being received and interpreted. Here is the piece of this question that tends to get overlooked entirely, and it comes from a direction that most people don't expect. Ancient humans had practical, survival-critical reasons to manage their own smell, and the evidence suggests they did. The most immediate and most important of those reasons was hunting. An ancient hunter approaching prey from upwind was an ancient hunter who came home with food. An ancient hunter whose human scent reached the prey before they were in range was an ancient hunter who watched the meal disappear into the landscape. The ability to manage and minimize their olfactory signature was not a nicety for ancient hunters. It was a core competency that directly affected whether the community ate or went hungry. Modern hunters in traditional communities across the world still practice scent management as a central element of hunting strategy. Washing in streams before a hunt. Rubbing the body with specific plants to mask or modify the human scent, approaching from downwind whenever possible, avoiding fires and strongly scented foods before a hunting expedition. These practices, documented across independent hunter-gatherer cultures on multiple continents, represent accumulated wisdom about smell management that almost certainly goes back to the earliest periods of organized human hunting. Ancient humans were not just thinking about what they smelled like, they were actively managing it with the tools their environment provided. Certain plants with strong scents would have been applied to the body to mask human odor. Smoke, from fires using specific woods or plant materials, would have been used to modify the body's scent profile in ways that made it less recognizable to prey animals. Water was used for washing before hunts not only in the modern hygienic sense, but specifically to reduce the human scent signature. And here is something remarkable. The use of plant materials on the body by ancient humans may have served scent modification purposes alongside other functions. Red ochre, which appears at ancient human sites going back at least 100,000 years and possibly much further, has been studied for its chemical properties. And some researchers have noted that its application to skin would have modified the skin microbiome and potentially the body's odor output. Whether this was a deliberate effect or an incidental one is impossible to determine, but the pattern of ancient humans regularly applying plant and mineral substances to their skin suggests a relationship with the body's surface that goes well beyond simple decoration. Now let's address something that the popular image of ancient humans as uniformly filthy gets profoundly wrong: the relationship between cleanliness, community, and social life. Ancient humans lived in small, intimate bands of roughly 20 to 50 people. In these groups, everyone knew everyone. There was essentially no privacy. People slept together, ate together, traveled together, and conducted virtually every aspect of their lives in close proximity to the same small group of individuals for years and decades. In this social context, mutual grooming was a central daily activity. As discussed in our earlier video on ancient hygiene, the evidence from both the fossil record and from modern hunter-gatherer communities is consistent. Ancient humans spent significant time daily in physical contact with each other, examining hair and skin, removing parasites, maintaining each other's bodies in a state of baseline cleanliness that the language of modern hygiene doesn't quite capture, but that was genuine and regular and important. This social grooming served obvious hygienic functions. Parasite removal is its primary practical purpose. But it also meant that ancient humans were in regular, close physical contact with each other's skin and hair in ways that would have produced constant olfactory information about each other's health status, stress levels, and bodily condition. The social group, in other words, was managing its members' smell collectively, not as a matter of aesthetic preference, but as a matter of practical health monitoring. Changes in a group member's body odor, sudden shifts that might indicate infection, disease, or physiological stress, would have been immediately noticeable to people who spent hours each week in close physical contact with that person. The body's smell was a health broadcast, received by everyone in the group. This is not the social relationship with smell that modern people have. Modern social norms around body odor are primarily about aesthetic standards, the expectation that you will artificially eliminate natural odors before presenting yourself in public. Ancient social attention to smell was primarily informational. Smell was data about health, status, stress, and reproductive condition, and it was being actively read and interpreted by people with finely calibrated olfactory abilities. Here's the question that brings everything together. How would an ancient human actually smell to a modern human nose? The honest answer requires acknowledging several things simultaneously. They would have smelled different, unquestionably. The combination of smoke from regular fire exposure, animal products from hunting and butchering, plant materials from foraging, and the basic reality of an active physical life without soap or synthetic detergents would have produced a smell profile that modern people, accustomed to a heavily deodorized and artificially scented environment, would find unfamiliar and probably challenging. But they would not have smelled the way that popular imagination suggests. The intense, sharp, sulfurous body odor of an unwashed modern human is substantially a product of the modern diet's effect on skin bacteria, an effect that ancient humans on a wild food diet would not have shared. The accumulated synthetic product smell of modern unwashed hair is a product of the shampoos and conditioners and styling products that modern hair is regularly saturated with. Ancient hair had none of these to accumulate. Ancient humans would have smelled of smoke, of the wild places they moved through, of the specific foods they ate and the specific plants they used on their bodies, of the animal skins they wore, of the specific bacterial community that lived on their skin, a community shaped by their diet and their lifestyle in ways that produced a human smell distinct from but not necessarily more offensive than what modern people produce. They would have smelled human, distinctly and recognizably human, but a version of human that is as different from the unwashed modern human as the landscape they lived in was different from a modern city. And here is the detail that puts the whole thing in perspective. Modern humans smell strange to traditional hunter-gatherer communities when contact occurs. Anthropologists and researchers who have spent time with isolated or semi-isolated traditional communities have documented that their presence, even freshly showered and wearing clean clothes by modern standards, is immediately noticeable to the community through smell. The combination of soap, shampoo, laundry detergent, synthetic fabrics, and the dietary compounds that produce modern metabolic odor signatures creates a smell profile that traditional communities find distinctly odd and identifiable from a distance. We think ancient humans were the smelly ones. From the other direction, we smell pretty strange too. Here is the conclusion that all of this points toward, and it is one worth sitting with. The question of whether ancient humans smelled terrible is, at its core, a question asked from inside a specific cultural framework that treats the complete artificial elimination of body odor as the neutral baseline, and anything less as a deviation. That framework is modern, urban, industrial, and commercially motivated. The modern deodorant industry did not exist before the 20th century, and the expectation of daily bathing as a social norm is even more recent than most people realize. Ancient humans smelled. Of course they smelled. Every living human has a smell because every living human has a skin microbiome producing volatile compounds from the interaction between bacteria and sweat. That is biology. It is not optional, but the specific smell that ancient humans had was shaped by a diet, a lifestyle, a skin microbiome, and a relationship with the natural environment that produced something fundamentally different from what a modern person without access to hygiene products would produce. Their smell was not the absence of modern hygiene. It was a different thing entirely. Something shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution in a world where smell was information, where the body's natural scent profile carried meaning, and where the relationship between human beings and their own smell had not yet been transformed by the industrial production of artificial scents and the cultural expectation of their constant application. Ancient humans did not smell terrible. They smelled ancient. And in a world where everything smelled ancient, the air, the ground, the water, the animals, the plants, the other people, that smell was home. It was only when civilization arrived and started insisting that the natural human body was a problem to be chemically solved that the ancient smell became unacceptable. And somewhere in that shift is a story worth thinking about what we gain and what we quietly give up when we decide that the body itself, in its natural state, is something that needs to be fixed,